Imagine having $32 billion to just give away. I mean, think about that for a second. You could cure regional diseases. You could build like a massive string of universities. Or honestly, you could just buy a few private islands and completely disappear.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good, actually.
Right. But instead, you spend that fortune funding some of the most highly polarized structural changes to global societies. And by doing that, you effectively make yourself the ultimate villain to governments all around the world. Today, we are looking at George Soros. So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, it's because you are that incredibly curious learner who wants to, cut through the noise and get to the absolute core of a really complex topic.
Absolutely. And we were working from a really diverse stack of sources for this one. We've got Soros's own 2009 academic lectures on financial markets. These are from the Open Society Foundations, plus his Forbes billionaire profile. Yeah, and we're also pulling from the deep history of his philanthropic network, along with international news reports detailing his pretty controversial role in the 1997 Asian financial crisis.
Our mission today is to basically unpack the extreme dichotomy of this man. I mean, how exactly does someone who gave away $32 billion to progressive causes earn the nickname, the man who broke the Bank of England? But before we go any further, we need to make something crystal clear to you, the listener.
Yeah, we really do. The source materials we're diving into today contain highly politically charged content. I mean, we're talking intense perspectives from both the far left and the far right of the political spectrum.
Right. And we want to state explicitly, we are absolutely not endorsing any political viewpoints here,
Not at all.
nor are we taking any sides in these global debates. Our sole purpose today is to impartially convey the facts, the financial theories, and the historical events exactly as they are presented in the original source material. We are simply your guides to the information.
Perfectly said. And, to understand the billionaire hedge fund manager, the sources make it very clear that we first have to understand the refugee, because his entire financial philosophy wasn't born on Wall Street. It was born from the trauma of surviving the Holocaust.
Yeah, let's go back to 1930 in Budapest, Hungary. He was born György Schwartz to a Jewish family, and by the time he was a young child, anti-Semitism and fascism were already just surging across Europe.
Right. And in 1936, his father, Tivadar, actually changed their last name to Soros.
Oh, to sound less conspicuously Jewish. Right?
Exactly. It's really interesting because in Hungarian, Soros means next in line. But in the constructed language of Esperanto, it means will soar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Tivadar is this really fascinating figure who fundamentally shaped his son's entire worldview. He had actually survived Russian prisoner of war camps during World War I and managed this just harrowing escape.
Yeah.
So he learned the hard way how to survive when the world basically collapses. So when Nazi Germany occupied Hungary in March 1944, Tivadar knew exactly what was coming, even when, a lot of others in his community just couldn't bring themselves to believe it. And tragically, over 500,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered during that occupation.
It's just devastating. And the Soros family managed to survive because Tivadar took really radical action. He bribed government officials to acquire false Christian identity papers for his wife and kids.
Yeah, they completely hid their Jewish heritage. They actually split up and lived under assumed names. And the sources note that Tivadar didn't just save his own family either. He helped manufacture and distribute fake papers to save a lot of other people too.
Which is incredible. And that creates the foundational life lesson that Tivadar instilled in his son, which is, in times of extreme crisis, the normal rules of society do not apply.
No, not at all.
I mean, if a Soros family had followed the law, if they had registered with the authorities like they were legally ordered to do by the occupying government, it would have meant certain death.
Yeah, absolute certainty.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this specific survival tactic basically becomes the blueprint for his entire life. Think of it like a board game. If you're playing a game and you suddenly realize the board itself is on fire, you don't politely wait for your turn to roll the dice.
Right. No, you don't.
You flip the board and run. Soros learned at age 14 that when a system is fundamentally broken or, hijacked by evil, playing by the assumed normal rules is actually the riskiest thing you can do.
That's a great analogy. And he carries that exact mindset with him when he flees Soviet-occupied Hungary in 1947 and relocates to London. I mean, he arrives as a 17-year-old refugee. He's working these grueling jobs like a railway porter and a nightclub waiter just to fund his studies at the London School of Economics.
Which is where everything shifts, right? It's at LSE where he encounters the philosopher Karl Popper. And that meeting completely redirects his intellectual life.
It really does. Popper had just written this monumental book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. And the core epistemological idea, which becomes the absolute bedrock of Soros's worldview, is that human knowledge is inherently imperfect.
Okay.
Basically, no single philosophy, no political ideology, and no government authority holds the ultimate truth. Because human understanding is always flawed, societies can only function if they remain open.
And by open, that means they must allow for democratic governance, absolute freedom of expression, and like the constant, rigorous questioning of all foundational assumptions.
Exactly.
And it's so wild because he takes this profound philosophical awakening, this core belief that human understanding is always flawed, and he applies it to the stock market.
Yeah.
And from that philosophy, he builds a $7.5 billion personal fortune.
It's pretty wild. He translates Popper's theories into this unique financial concept he calls reflexivity. We have the transcripts from a series of lectures he gave on this theory at Central European University in 2009. And in those lectures, he comes right out swinging against the dominant economic theory of the 20th century.
Oh, he takes direct aim at the efficient market hypothesis, which, for context for you listening, that is the foundational idea taught in almost every single modern business school. It argues that financial markets are perfectly rational, that they naturally tend toward a stable equilibrium, and that stock prices perfectly reflect all available information and reality.
Right, which Soros argues is a complete illusion.
Yeah.
His theory of reflexivity operates on two cardinal principles. The first is that market prices do not perfectly reflect reality. They always, and he emphasizes always, distort the underlying economic fundamentals.
Because humans are fallible.
Exactly. Because we operate in constant uncertainty, our pricing is always biased by our emotions, our ignorance, and our assumptions.
And the second principle is the real paradigm shift here. The distorted market prices don't just passively sit there reflecting a flawed view of reality. They actively change reality.
Yes. The market participants' biased views create these really powerful positive and negative feedback loops. And these loops actually alter the very economic fundamentals they are supposed to be measuring.
So what does this all mean? Let's use a real-world analogy to make reflexivity tangible for a second. Imagine a completely healthy bank with solid financials. Everything is great. But a baseless rumor starts spreading on social media that the bank is failing.
Which happens, yeah.
All the time. That rumor is a misconception. It's a total distortion of reality. But because of that rumor, people panic. They run to the bank and withdraw all their money at once.
Yeah.
And because everyone withdraws their funds, the bank loses its liquidity and actually fails.
Right.
The misconception didn't just misread reality, it literally manufactured a new reality.
That is reflexivity in its purest form. And Soros argues this mechanism is the exact anatomy of every boom-bust bubble in financial history. Every bubble consists of two parts, an underlying real trend and a misconception about that trend. When the trend and the misconception positively reinforce each other, the bubble rapidly inflates.
Like the housing market. He uses the housing market as his prime example, right?
He does. The real trend is that credit becomes cheaper and easier to get. The misconception is that the value of a house is an absolute truth, totally independent of how easy it is to get a mortgage.
But they are completely reflexive.
Exactly. Cheap credit drives up housing prices. Those higher prices make the banks feel safer about their collateral, so they lend even more money, which drives prices up even higher. It creates this massive positive feedback loop that just completely detaches from the actual value of the homes.
And Soros built his hedge fund empire, the Quantum Fund, on spotting exactly when these reflexive loops have pushed a market so incredibly far away from reality that a crash isn't just possible, it's inevitable.
Yeah, he waits for that twilight period where the momentum is still pushing prices up, but the economic reality just can no longer support the weight. And then he aggressively positions himself for the collapse.
Now, you'd think making these academic observations would keep him in the realm of theory. But the sources show how reflexivity became incredibly, devastatingly practical. It was the exact tool he used to famously break national economies. Let's look at 1992.
Ah, Black Wednesday.
Yes, the event that earned him his infamous nickname. What happened there?
Well, in 1992, the British government was participating in the European exchange rate mechanism. Basically, they were trying to keep the value of the British pound artificially high-pegged to the German mark just to control inflation.
Okay.
Soros looked at the underlying British economy, which was weak and really suffering from high interest rates, and realized the government's attempt to prop up the currency was a reflexive misconception that couldn't possibly last.
So he didn't just, casually bet against it. He aggressively shorted the British pound. He borrowed billions of pounds, sold them for German marks, and just waited.
Yeah, and the Bank of England spent billions trying to defend their currency, buying up pounds to maintain this illusion of strength, but they eventually ran out of firepower. They had to devalue the currency. The pound crashed, and Soros bought back the cheaper pounds to repay his loans.
Pocketing, an estimated $1 billion in pure profit in a single day.
In a single day, yeah. That staggering trade made him a global financial icon, but, the sources go much deeper into a later event.
Right.
The 1997 Asian financial crisis,
Yeah.
specifically what happened in Thailand, the Thai people refer to it as the Tom Yum Goong crisis.
Okay, so Thailand had pegged its currency, the baht, to the US dollar. And to explain why a currency peg can be so dangerous, think of like a small fishing boat tying itself to a massive cargo ship.
I love this analogy.
Right. As long as the waters are calm and both are moving at the exact same speed, everything is totally fine. But to attract foreign investment, Thailand kept its domestic interest rates very high.
Yeah, and so foreign money came just flooding into the country to chase those high interest rates. It created a massive economic and real estate bubble in Thailand, but then the economic winds
The
shifted.
United States raised its own interest rate.
Exactly. Suddenly, the massive cargo ship, the US dollar, starts accelerating.
And because the Thai baht is tied to the dollar, it's dragged along. The baht is forced to become artificially stronger, completely out of sync with the actual Thai economy, which completely destroys Thailand's ability to export its goods.
Yeah.
So the small fishing boat is suddenly being dragged underwater.
And Soros and his analysts at the Quantum Fund, they saw this. They saw this massive reflexive divergence between the struggling Thai economy and the artificial value of the pegged currency. So they started heavily shorting the baht in the forward markets.
Right. And to clarify that financial jargon for a second, shorting in the forward markets means Soros was entering into contracts, agreeing to sell the Thai baht at a specific price at a future date.
Correct.
He made these agreements, fully believing that by the time that future date arrived, the baht would have crashed. He could then buy the currency for pennies on the dollar, fulfill his contract, and pocket the massive difference.
And the Bank of Thailand tried desperately to fight back against these speculative attacks. They blew through $24 billion.
$24 billion.
Yeah, a massive chunk of their nation's foreign reserves just buying up their own currency just to maintain the peg.
But they eventually ran out of money. On July 6, 1997, they were forced to float the baht. And floating the currency simply means the government stopped artificially propping up its value and just left it to the mercy of the open market.
And the result was instantaneous catastrophe. The currency's value plummeted. The Thai stock market plunged 75%. Companies that owed money in foreign currencies went bankrupt overnight. I mean, mass layoffs hit the working class and people's debts multiplied instantly.
The devastation rippled across all of Asia. In the aftermath, Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad famously pointed the finger directly at George Soros, basically accusing him of maliciously orchestrating the entire regional economic collapse.
Yeah, though we need to bring in vital nuance from the sources regarding that blame.
Definitely.
Because while Soros became the global face of the 1997 crisis, he wasn't actually the biggest player. Julian Robertson's Tiger Fund actually bet 3 times as much against the baht as Soros did.
Right. It was nearly $3 billion compared to Soros's $1 billion.
Exactly. And Soros's defense of his actions is rooted entirely in his theory of reflexivity. He argued that his hedge fund was merely signaling a fatal flaw that already existed in the market. He claimed the real cause of the catastrophe was the Bank of Thailand's profoundly flawed strategy of draining its own reserves to defend an indefensible currency peg. In his view, if the authorities had listened to the market signal earlier and devalued the currency gradually, the crash wouldn't have been so utterly devastating.
Okay, I have to push back on this defense on behalf of anyone listening right now. He claims he's just a passive signal, or like a messenger. But if Soros knows his massive billion-dollar financial actions can actively trigger a panic that helps collapse a national currency, ruining the lives and livelihoods of everyday citizens in the process. Isn't he the villain here?
It's a fair question.
I mean, why should we accept this philosophical defense that he's just holding up a mirror to the market when he's making $1 billion off of the destruction?
Well, that is the ultimate tension of George Soros, the investor. He consciously separates his actions as a market participant from the morality of the financial system itself. And this perspective is exactly what leads us to his stark warnings about the 2008 global financial crash,
Right.
because he didn't view the 1997 Asian crisis as an isolated, unfortunate event. He saw it as a glaring symptom of a terminal disease that ultimately culminated in 2008.
Yeah, he calls the 2008 crash the explosion of a super bubble.
Right. And in his 2009 lecture series, he outlines the anatomy of this super bubble. The underlying real trend was the ever-increasing use of credit and leverage over decades. But the misconception fueling it was a prevailing ideology he calls market fundamentalism.
Market fundamentalism. That's the deep-seated belief championed heavily in the 1980s by political leaders like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher that markets are inherently rational, entirely self-correcting, and should be left completely alone by regulators.
Exactly. And Soros points out a really fascinating irony here. Every time there was a major financial crisis, so the international debt crisis in 1982, the stock market crash in 1987, the 1997 Asian crisis, the 2000 dot-com bust, every time the financial authorities intervened to save the system from total collapse. But because the system was continuously saved, it actually reinforced the false belief that markets somehow take care of themselves. These massive government interventions were perceived as successful tests of the system, which just kept inflating the super bubble until the subprime mortgage crisis finally blew the entire thing apart in 2008.
Which is why his proposed solutions are surprisingly heavy-handed regulations for a billionaire investor.
Very heavy-handed.
He argues that regulators must control credit availability directly, not just manage the money supply. They have to actively monitor the systemic risks posed by massive hedge funds, like his own, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
He even insists that banks should be completely banned from proprietary trading, which is the practice where banks gamble in the markets using their own money, rather than just managing money on behalf of their clients.
He really wants strict boundaries drawn between commercial banking and speculative investing.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Soros admits, right in the source materials, that when he personally sees a bubble forming, he doesn't walk away. He actively rushes in to buy, adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
He literally participates in inflating the very bubbles he criticizes.
Which sounds completely hypocritical until, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains his entire seemingly contradictory philosophy. Soros believes that all market participants, including himself, are inherently irrational, biased, and driven by self-interest.
Right.
He acts in his own financial interest to make money within the rules of the game. And that is exactly why he argues that regulators, not investors, must be the ones to step in. He famously asserted that since markets are fundamentally incapable of recognizing their own bubbles, we need powerful regulators to counteract the market. You simply cannot rely on market participants to police themselves.
He's essentially using a predator and fence analogy here. He's saying, I am a predator by nature, so society needs to build a much better fence. Don't blame the predator for eating the chickens. Blame the farmer who left the gate wide open.
Exactly. It's a stark, pretty unapologetic way to frame his career, but it perfectly captures the logic of his actions. And this brings us to the final and undoubtedly most polarizing aspect of his life.
Right.
Because what does a man who made billions exploiting the inherent flaws in global markets actually do with his immense wealth?
He decides to forcefully engineer his vision of Karl Popper's open society.
Yeah.
In 2017, the sources detail how he transferred $18 billion of his personal wealth to his open society foundations. And that brought his total lifetime philanthropic giving to over $32 billion.
Which is staggering. And the foundation operates on a massive scale. They fund progressive causes globally. They heavily finance immigration reform initiatives, drug policy reform. I mean, they were a major early backer of the medical marijuana movement in the U.S.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they do LGBTQ rights advocacy and support groups associated with the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. And maintaining our strict impartial reporting of the sources here, we have to detail the immense organized global blowback this philanthropy has generated.
Oh, absolutely. It's intense.
The Open Society Foundations were formally banned in Russia by Vladimir Putin. Soros was effectively kicked out of his home country of Hungary by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who passed laws specifically targeting his organizations. The foundation was forced to cease operations in Turkey. In the U.S., his network was targeted for investigation by the Department of Justice during the Trump administration. And he's heavily criticized by conservative Israeli groups for funding pro-Palestinian NGOs, specifically an organization named Adala.
Yeah, it's really widespread. And what's fascinating here is why he triggers such intense universal reactions from nationalist governments across the entire political spectrum.
Why is that?
Because he uses massive capitalist wealth to aggressively fund systemic structural progressive changes. He openly admits in interviews that he likes to tackle losing causes. Because he views himself as a permanent minority and an outsider, he categorically refuses to pledge absolute loyalty to any single group, nation-state, or even his own Jewish heritage. And that steadfast refusal to conform to nationalistic expectations just infuriates governments globally.
It also fuels some of the wildest conspiracy theories on the internet. Elon Musk has publicly compared him to the comic book villain Magneto. There are completely fabricated anti-Semitic claims about his actions as a 14-year-old during World War II. He is constantly accused by right-wing commentators of directly paying for and orchestrating grassroots street protests around the world.
Yeah, he has essentially become the ultimate blank canvas for geopolitical anxiety. I mean, a deeply wealthy, philosophically stateless financier funding rapid social change is just the perfect archetype for a global conspiracy theory.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it raises a vital question, one I really want you to chew on for a minute. Does Soros's massive financial influence actually contradict the very open society he claims to promote? If one single billionaire can inject $32 billion to sway global policy, dictate social movements, and shape political outcomes, is that society truly open to the voice of the average citizen? Or is it just an open market available to the highest bidder?
That is the defining paradox of his legacy right there. He purposefully uses the tools of extreme wealth concentration to try and dismantle the structures of concentrated power.
It's an incredible contradiction. And just to recap the sheer scale of the journey we've taken on this deep dive today, we started with a young boy dodging the Nazis in occupied Hungary using false papers. We followed his evolution into a ruthless hedge fund manager who exploited human fallibility to break national central banks. And we ended with a mega donor trying to unilaterally fund a global progressive agenda, making himself the ultimate bogeyman for governments worldwide.
The trajectory of his life is unmatched in modern history, but why does any of this matter to you today?
Right.
It matters because Soros's core concept, reflexivity, is arguably more relevant now than it has ever been. It applies directly to our daily lives in the modern information age.
Yeah, reflexivity shows us how our collective beliefs, our rapid-fire fears, and our shared misconceptions can literally shape the physical reality of the world we live in. We see this play out constantly. We see it in the stock market, with meme stocks soaring on internet hype. We see it in viral bank runs triggered by social media panic. And we absolutely see it in our modern politics.
Definitely. Reality is no longer just a set of objective facts. Reality is what we believe is happening, acting upon itself to force a new outcome.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative thought for you to mull over. If our misconceptions can actually alter reality, as the theory of reflexivity suggests, are the countless sprawling conspiracy theories about George Soros actually shaping a new, tangible political reality of their own? Think about it. Entire political campaigns are run, restrictive laws are passed, and national borders are closed based entirely on the fear of his hidden influence. The misconception is actively creating a new world, entirely regardless of whether those theories hold any truth.
That is the ultimate reflexive loop.
And it brings us right back to the lesson he learned in 1944. When the normal rules of society start to warp and the safety net becomes an illusion, you have to be the one to realize the game has changed. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.